found the room online on a Tuesday night, sitting in my car outside a gas station after work, eating a cold sandwich because I was too tired to cook. At that point in my life, I was working at a chicken farm about 40 minutes outside town. It wasn't a job anyone dreamed of having, but it paid enough to keep me moving. The hours were long. The smell stayed on your clothes, no matter how many times you washed them. And by the end of every shift, my body felt like it had been dragged behind a truck. I had been staying with a friend, but his girlfriend had moved in, and I could tell they wanted their space back. I didn't blame them. I needed a place of my own, or at least a room where I could sleep without feeling like a burden. That was when I saw the listing. Furnished room for rent, quiet country home, weekly payment accepted, no lease required. The house was only 10 minutes from the farm. The rent was cheap. Too cheap, honestly. But when you're broke, cheap doesn't scare you the way it should. I called the number right away. An old man answered. His voice was low, dry, and rough, like he had spent his whole life smoking cigarettes in a closed room. "Room still available?" I asked. There was a pause. Then he said, "Yes." His name was Ben. He told me he was retired, lived alone, and didn't like trouble. He said I could come see the room the next afternoon. The house sat at the end of a narrow dirt road, surrounded by flat fields and trees that looked dead even though it was still summer. It was an old farmhouse, 2 stories tall, with faded white paint and a sagging front porch. There was an old pickup truck parked beside the house, covered in dust. A rusted wind chime hung near the front door, moving slightly even though there was barely any wind. Ben opened the door before I knocked. He was tall, thin, and looked older than he sounded. His skin hung loose around his face, and his eyes were pale blue, almost gray. He wore dark suspenders over a white undershirt, and his hands looked huge compared to the rest of him. He didn't smile. "You the boy from the phone?" he asked. I said yes. He stepped aside and let me in. The inside of the house smelled like old wood, dust, and something else I couldn't place. Not rotten exactly, just stale. Like a house that had been closed up for too long. The room he showed me was upstairs at the end of the hall. It had a bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out toward the trees behind the house. It wasn't nice, but it was clean enough. "You work at the farm?" Ben asked. "Yeah. What time you leave?" "Usually early, around 5. "What time you come back?" "Depends. Sometimes 4, sometimes later." He nodded slowly like he was writing it all down in his head. Then he told me the rules. No parties, no guests without asking. Keep the kitchen clean. Pay every Friday. And then, just before I agreed to take the room, he added one more thing. Basement is off limits. I looked at him. Okay. He stared at me for a little too long. "I mean it," he said. "You don't go down there." I gave a small laugh, thinking he was just one of those old men who liked being dramatic. "No problem, I don't need the basement." He didn't laugh. I moved in 2 days later. All I had were my clothes, a small dresser, a backpack, and a few bags of food. Ben watched from the porch while I carried everything upstairs. He didn't offer to help, but I didn't expect him to. He just stood there holding a mug of black coffee, staring like I was moving into his house against his will, even though he had rented the room to me. The first few days were normal enough. Ben mostly stayed downstairs. He cooked simple meals, watched old TV shows, and went to bed early. Sometimes I heard him walking around late at night, but I figured old people had strange sleeping habits. The only thing that bothered me was the basement door. It was in the kitchen, next to the back door. It had a heavy bolt lock on the outside and a rubber strip under the bottom, like someone had tried to seal it shut. Every time I passed it, I could feel Ben watching me. On my 4th night there, I came home exhausted. I took a shower, went straight to my room, and fell asleep with my work clothes still on the floor. Sometime in the middle of the night, my bedroom door opened. The hallway light poured into my room. I woke up instantly. Ben was standing in the doorway. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. He was just standing there, one hand on the doorknob, breathing heavily. "What are you doing?" I asked, sitting up. His eyes looked glassy. In that rough voice, he said, "Stay out of the basement." I blinked. "What? I know you went down there." I was still half asleep and confused. "I didn't go anywhere." He stared at me. "You stay out." Then he shut the door and walked away. I sat there in the dark for a long time, listening to his footsteps go down the stairs. The next morning, Ben acted like nothing had happened. He was sitting at the kitchen table eating toast when I came down. "You came into my room last night," I said. He looked up slowly. "No, I didn't." I almost laughed, but his face was completely serious. "You opened my door and told me to stay out of the basement." He chewed once, swallowed, and said, "Then stay out." That was all. I should have packed my things right then, but I didn't. Because the room was cheap. Because it was close to work. Because I told myself old people were weird sometimes. The next day was my day off. Ben left around 10 in the morning in his old truck. I watched from my upstairs window as he drove down the dirt road and disappeared behind the trees. For the first time since I moved in, I was alone in the house. I went downstairs to make coffee, and there it was again. The basement door. I tried to ignore it, I really did. But the more I tried not to look at it, the more I felt pulled toward it. That was the problem with being told not to do something. If Ben had never mentioned the basement, I probably never would have cared. But now I needed to know. I walked up to the door and looked at the bolt lock. It wasn't locked. The bolt was slid open. I stood there listening. The house was silent. I told myself I was only going to open the door and look. Just a quick peek. Nothing more. I pulled the door open. Cold air rushed up from below. The basement was pitch black. There was a smell too. Faint, but there. Something sour and heavy. I turned on my phone flashlight and pointed it down the stairs. The wooden steps looked old and uneven. I should have closed the door. Instead, I stepped down. The stairs creaked under my weight, each sound louder than the last. At the bottom, I found a light switch and flipped it on. A single bulb flickered overhead. At first, the basement looked normal. Old shelves, paint cans, cardboard boxes, tools hanging on the wall. A washing machine that looked like it hadn't been used in years. I let out a breath. "See?" I whispered to myself. Nothing. Then I saw the door in the far corner. It was small, metal, and painted gray. There was another rubber strip under it, thicker than the one upstairs. Around the edges of the door, someone had stuffed towels and plastic sheets like they were trying to stop air from leaking out. That smell was stronger near it. I knew I should leave, but I walked closer. There was no lock on this door either. I grabbed the handle and pulled. At first, it wouldn't open. The rubber seal stuck to the floor. I pulled harder. The door came loose with a wet ripping sound. The smell hit me so hard I almost fell backward. It was the worst thing I had ever smelled in my life. Rotten meat, old blood, mold, something dead. I covered my mouth with my shirt and aimed my phone inside. The room was small and windowless. The concrete floor was stained dark in several places. There was a long metal table against one wall. A drain in the center of the floor. Plastic sheets hanging from hooks. Black garbage bags stacked in the corner. Long bags. Too long. My hand started shaking so badly the light from my phone danced across the walls. Then I noticed the camera. It was mounted in the upper corner of the room, aimed directly at the metal table. A small red light was blinking, recording. That was when I heard something upstairs. A door closing. Ben was home. For a few seconds I couldn't move. I stood there in that hidden basement room with my shirt pulled over my nose, my phone shaking in my hand, and my eyes locked on the small red light blinking from the camera in the corner. Recording? That one blinking light made everything worse. It meant the room wasn't old. It wasn't abandoned. It wasn't some forgotten storage space from years ago. Someone was still using it. Someone had been using it recently. Then I heard the sound again from upstairs. The front door had closed. Ben was home. My first instinct was to run straight up the stairs, grab my things, and leave. But then another thought hit me. If Ben came into the kitchen and saw the basement door open, he would know. If he checked the basement and found the hidden room door open, he would know for sure. I forced myself to move. I took one quick picture of the room. My hands were shaking so badly that the first one came out blurry. So I took another. Then I stepped back, pulled the gray metal door shut, and pushed it hard until the rubber seal stuck to the floor again. The smell still clung to my shirt. I turned off the basement light and rushed up the stairs as quietly as I could. At the top, I paused. Through the basement door, I could hear Ben moving around in the kitchen. The floorboards creaked slowly. One step, then another. I held my breath. If he was standing on the other side of the door, I was finished. I gently pushed the basement door open just enough to peek through the crack. The kitchen was empty, but I could hear him in the living room. He was coughing, a deep, wet cough. Then I heard the sound of his chair scraping against the floor. I stepped into the kitchen and closed the basement door behind me as softly as possible. Then I walked toward the stairs. I tried not to rush. I tried to act normal, even though my heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. Just as I reached the bottom step, Ben spoke from the living room. "You been downstairs?" I froze. His voice was calm, too calm. I turned slowly. He was sitting in his old chair facing the TV, but the TV wasn't on. His hands rested on his knees. His head was turned slightly toward me. "No," I said. The lie came out too fast. He didn't answer right away. He just sat there. Then he said, "You smell funny." My stomach dropped. I looked down at my shirt, still holding the collar close to my chest. "I was outside," I said. "Trash smelled bad." Ben slowly turned his head and looked at me. His pale eyes looked empty. "Trash gets picked up on Thursdays," he said. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. After a few seconds, he turned back toward the blank TV. "Don't go where you don't belong," he whispered. I went upstairs without answering. The moment I got into my room, I closed the door and pushed my dresser in front of it. It wasn't heavy, but it made me feel a little safer. Then I grabbed my backpack and started packing. I didn't care about folding clothes. I didn't care about leaving anything behind. I stuffed shirts, pants, socks, my charger, wallet, and anything important into my bag. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow. Heavy. Each step made the old wood groan. I stopped packing and listened. Ben reached the top of the stairs. His footsteps moved down the hallway, then they stopped outside my door. There was no knock, no voice, just silence. I stood in the middle of the room, holding my backpack, staring at the door. Then Ben said, "You don't have to be scared." His voice was low and almost gentle. That made it worse. I didn't answer. "You saw something you didn't understand," he said. "That's all." My mouth went dry. He knew. I looked toward the window. It was old, but it opened. My room was on the second floor, and outside there was a slanted roof over the back porch. If I climbed out carefully, maybe I could get down. Ben tapped one fingernail against the door. Tap, tap, tap. "I can explain it," he said. I slowly put my backpack on. Then I moved toward the window. The floor creaked under my foot. The tapping stopped. "You moving around in there?" he asked. I froze again. Then the doorknob turned. The dresser held the door shut, but only barely. The door opened an inch, hit the dresser, and stopped. Ben pushed once. The dresser scraped back slightly. I didn't wait anymore. I threw the window open. Cold air rushed into the room. I climbed out, one leg first, then the other, lowering myself onto the porch roof. The old metal roof bent under my weight with a loud pop. Behind me, Ben slammed into the bedroom door. The dresser moved. I crawled across the porch roof, trying not to slip. My hands were sweating. My backpack caught on the window frame. And for one horrifying second, I thought I was stuck. Then it ripped free. The bedroom door crashed open behind me. Ben appeared at the window. His face looked different now. Not confused, not old and weak, angry. His mouth was open and his eyes were wide. "You stupid boy," he shouted. I slid down the porch roof, hit the edge, and dropped into the grass. Pain shot through my ankle when I landed, but I forced myself up and ran toward my car. The keys were in my pocket. I reached the driver's door and looked back. Ben was already outside. I still don't know how he got down so fast. He came around the side of the house carrying something in his right hand. A hammer. I got into the car, slammed the door, and locked it. Ben reached me, Just as I started the engine, he hit the driver's window with the hammer. The glass cracked but didn't break. I screamed and threw the car into reverse. Ben hit the window again. This time a spider web crack spread across the glass. I slammed the gas. The car shot backward, almost hitting a tree. Then I threw it into drive and sped down the dirt road. In the rear view mirror, I saw Ben standing in the middle of the driveway, still holding the hammer. He wasn't chasing anymore, he was watching. I drove for almost 20 minutes before I stopped. I pulled into the parking lot of a closed diner and finally looked at the picture on my phone. It was dark and blurry, but it was enough. The metal table, the black bags, the stains, the camera in the corner. I called my brother first. He lived on a farm not too far away, and he was the only person I trusted enough to believe me before asking questions. When he answered, I could barely speak. "Come to the diner on Route 6, I said. "Something's wrong. Really wrong." He was there 15 minutes later. The second he saw my face, he knew I wasn't exaggerating. I showed him the picture. He stared at it for a long time. Then he looked at me and said, "Why the hell didn't you call the police first?" I panicked. "You need to call them now." So I did. I told the dispatcher everything. I told them I was renting a room from Ben. I told them about the basement, the hidden room, the smell, the bags, the blood stains, the camera, and the fact that he chased me with a hammer. The dispatcher asked if I was safe. I said I was with my brother. Then she told me not to go back to the house. I had no intention of going back. My brother took me to his place, and we waited. Those next few hours were some of the longest of my life. Every time a car passed outside, I thought it was Ben. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected to see a message from him, even though I didn't think he had my number. Around midnight, 2 deputies came to my brother's house. They asked me to tell the story again. I showed them the photo. One deputy zoomed in on the black bags and then looked at the other deputy without saying anything. That scared me more than if he had reacted with shock. They asked if Ben had any weapons. I told them about the hammer. They asked if I had seen any bodies. I said no. They asked if I'd touched anything. I said only the door handle. Then they left. Before leaving, one of them said, "Stay here tonight, don't contact him. Don't answer if he calls." That was when I asked, "Do you think he'll come here?" The deputy didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Just keep the doors locked." That answer didn't help. My brother gave me the couch in his living room, but I didn't sleep. I just sat there under a blanket, staring at the front door, waiting for headlights to appear outside. At around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. My heart stopped. I didn't answer. A voicemail appeared a minute later. My brother and I listened to it together. At first, there was only breathing, then Ben's voice. "You forgot your dresser." Silence, then he whispered, "And your shoes?" The voicemail ended. I looked down. In the rush, I had left my work boots at his house, but that wasn't what scared me. What scared me was that I had never given Ben my number. I barely slept that night. Every little sound outside my brother's farmhouse made me jump. The wind rattling the windows sounded like footsteps. The old trees, scratching against the roof, sounded like fingernails. Every pair of headlights, passing on the road, made me think Ben had somehow found me. The voicemail kept replaying in my head. "You forgot your dresser and your shoes." He had my phone number. I had never written it down anywhere inside the house. I hadn't given it to him. The only place it existed was on the rental application I'd filled out online before moving in. That meant he had gone through my personal information. Maybe before I even moved in. Maybe he had planned everything from the beginning. Around 7 the next morning, 2 sheriff's deputies returned. This time, they weren't alone. 3 unmarked SUVs pulled into the driveway behind them. Men wearing jackets with large yellow letters across the back climbed out. State police. One detective asked if I could come with them to identify the property. I agreed. The drive back felt much longer than it really was. As we turned onto the dirt road, I noticed something immediately. Ben's truck was gone. The front door of the house stood wide open. The detective looked at the deputies. Nobody goes in alone. Everyone drew their weapons. I stayed behind near one of the patrol cars while they entered the house. The silence lasted almost 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes felt longer than the entire week I had lived there. Finally, one deputy walked back outside. His face had completely changed. He wasn't scared. He looked disturbed. "We found the room," he said quietly. The detective nodded. "What else?" The deputy hesitated. "He's been cleaning. Another hour passed before they finally allowed me to answer more questions. One detective sat across from me inside his SUV. You said there were black bags. Yes, they're gone. What? They're gone. My stomach dropped, but he continued. We found fresh bleach on the concrete floor. We found cleaning supplies, we found cutting tools, plastic sheets, industrial gloves. He paused. And a burn barrel behind the house. I couldn't speak. The detective sighed. Looks like somebody tried very hard to erase whatever was there. Did you find Ben? He slowly shook his head. No. That answer chilled me more than anything else. For the next week, I stayed with my brother. News spread quickly through our small county. Everyone knew something had happened at Ben's farmhouse. Police cars stayed there for days. Crime scene tapes surrounded the property. Nobody would tell the public exactly what they had found. Rumors spread everywhere. Some people said it was an illegal butcher shop. Others believed Ben had been disposing of dead livestock. A few whispered something much darker. 3 people had disappeared within 20 miles of that property over the previous 6 years. None of them had ever been found. Officially, the sheriff refused to connect the cases. Unofficially, nobody believed that. About 2 weeks later, Detective Morris called me. We'd like you to come identify some belongings. I met him at the sheriff's department. He led me into an evidence room. On a long metal table sat dozens of personal items. Wallets, backpacks, old driver's licenses, watches, car keys, cell phones. There had to be over 50 different items. My chest tightened. These were all found in the basement? I asked. He nodded once. They were hidden inside a false wall. I stared at the table. Every object belonged to someone. Someone with a family. Someone who probably never came home. Then I noticed something, a pair of work boots, exactly like mine. Same brand, same size, except they weren't mine. Mine had been left upstairs in Ben's hallway. These boots were old, covered in dried mud. Inside one boot was a folded sock. Detective Morris picked it up carefully. There were 7 pairs. 7? He nodded. Same size. A horrible thought crossed my mind. What are you saying? He looked directly at me. We think you weren't the first young man to rent that room. Months passed. Ben completely disappeared. No bank activity, no phone records, no family, nothing. It was like he had vanished into thin air. The farmhouse was eventually demolished. Nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted to live there again. I tried to move on. I found another job, another apartment. Eventually, life became normal again. Or at least, close to normal. Until one rainy evening nearly 8 months later. I was grocery shopping after work. As I pushed my cart toward my car, I noticed an old pickup truck parked 3 rows away. It looked familiar, very familiar. Old white paint, rust near the bumper, cracked windshield. I froze. No, I told myself there were thousands of old trucks that looked the same. I was imagining things. Then I noticed the license plate. The last 3 numbers matched Ben's truck. My heart nearly stopped. I looked around the parking lot. People were loading groceries. A mother was helping her daughter into a car seat. An elderly couple walked toward the entrance. Everything looked completely normal. Then I saw him, standing near the far edge of the parking lot, watching me. Same suspenders, same gray hair, same pale eyes. He wasn't smiling. He simply stood there, looking directly at me. I reached for my phone. By the time I looked back, he was gone. The truck was gone too. Police searched the area. Nothing. No cameras captured the truck leaving. No witnesses remembered seeing an old man. It was as if he had never been there. Even today, I don't know if Ben is alive. Maybe I imagined seeing him. Maybe trauma played tricks on my mind. Or maybe he really was there. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night after dreaming about that basement. I smell bleach. I smell rotten flesh. I hear the basement door opening, and every single time, I remember one thing that Detective Morris told me before I left his office, something that has stayed with me ever since. He said, "We searched every inch of that basement." He stopped for a second before finishing, and we still haven't figured out what the camera was recording after the table was cleaned. I asked him what he meant. He looked at me with a tired expression and quietly replied, because the camera wasn't pointed at the table anymore. It had been turned toward the basement stairs, as if someone wanted to record whoever came down next. I never asked another question, because deep down, I already knew the answer. If I had been just a few minutes slower that afternoon, I would have been the next person on that recording. The end.